Speak to Hatice Han Er, who's a criminologist based in Istanbul. Many thanks for speaking to us on TRT World. So explain to us, what does forensic analysis of an alleged crime scene like this typically involve? What will they be looking for? What will they be doing?
Well, first of all, especially in this case, it is a very, very different case because of the circumstances. What the forensic scientists would have to initially do is actually identify the crime scene. Now, a crime scene can be also within a building, or there could also be a secondary crime scene and a third crime scene as well. So first of all, the first step would be to actually identify the crime scene. The second most important step for these forensic scientists is going to be actually preserving what there is already left of that crime scene. Now, as you said earlier as well, it's been about 2 weeks since Mr. Khashoggi has actually gone missing, and these allegations actually stemmed up. So they need to still make sure that they preserve any kind of evidence within this area, within this crime scene. And after that, the third most important step would be to actually go and collect any kind of evidence. Now, when it comes to collection of evidence, there's actually 2 steps to this. One, of course, is always the physical evidence, the major evidence. But again, with the time frame in mind, I don't think there's going to be any kind of major physical evidence that the investigators will be able to find. However, they will actually be concentrating more so on trace evidence, what we call trace evidence. There is a principle in forensic science which is at the heart of forensic science called the Lockhart's exchange principle. And this means that any kind of perpetrator of crime will always bring something to the crime scene and will always take something from the crime scene. In this case, rather than the perpetrator, of course, they need to establish some kind of evidence that Mr. Khashoggi has become a victim of a homicide. So they would have to look at trace evidence and try to trace it back to him. So they will be looking at fibers, they'll be looking at hair, they'll be looking at DNA. Now, these are going to be very critical forensic trace evidence, but there's also a very big question in regards to these kinds of trace evidence too. For instance, trace evidence can be transferred. I mean, Mr. Khashoggi, yes, could have walked into that embassy, the consulate, I'm sorry, could have had contact with a person, and any kind of trace evidence like hair would have been transferred to another person. But we need to also, and this is what the forensic scientists will also be thinking about, is that when somebody comes to a consulate, there is an area for the public, and there's also an area that's actually off limits to the public. Finding trace evidence in those off-limit areas would be a good lead, but that is not definitive in stating that, yes, a crime has been committed here, because there is something also called secondary transfer of trace evidence, for instance. So Mr. Khashoggi could have had contact with one person who could have gone to the off-limit area and transferred, for example, some hair belonging to him.
So, Hatice, what you're saying is very interesting. You are essentially saying, even though it's been 2 weeks, even though we've seen cleaners go in and out of that building, there is still a chance that something could be found, some sort of trace evidence could be found, yes, if allegedly something had happened. Okay. And how long do you think the team, a team like this, would need to gather this kind of evidence? How long are they going to be in there?
Well, it really depends on the actual building itself. If they are suspecting the whole building, I don't know how big the building is, whether there's a basement, for example, but every single room would have to be combed down, especially for trace evidence. But what is more important, I would like to stress on this specifically, is that even though a thorough cleaning could get rid of trace evidence, one thing that is almost impossible to actually get rid of is blood. With blood testing, with luminol testing, it would be cracking the case, basically. If there is any form of blood that belongs to Mr. Khashoggi, this could come up in the building. And with blood evidence, it doesn't matter how long the crime has been committed. There have been cases overseas where years have passed, where a person was murdered in a house, and 30 years later, when the new owners of the house changed the floorboards, they actually found blood under the floorboards, so tiles. Blood can seep through anywhere. Whether you clean it very, very thoroughly, for instance, you really can't get rid of blood very easily. So that would be the most important part of forensic evidence for these investigators.
Hatice, fascinating to talk to you and to get your insight. Hatice Han Er, a criminologist based here in Istanbul.